morning, everybody. My name is Ray Steen. I'm joined with Jeremy Keiko. We are with Mainspring, an IT strategy consulting firm supporting the DMV area. Appreciate everyone taking the time today to join us for our first of many monthly vCIO webinars. Today's topic is going to be one that's relevant to everybody these days, not particularly new, but one that seems to cause a lot of conversation and controversy. Just a little bit about this webinar and in this webinar series. vCIO Perspectives, Virtual Chief Information Officer Perspectives, is the mantra for this webinar series, and it is named appropriately. We're here to share with you what our virtual chief information officers are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, working with small to medium-sized businesses, nonprofits, associations, and what those organizations are doing to address the digital transformation and the challenges of balancing budget, talent retention, recruiting, and operational efficiency and security. So I again am welcomed with Jeremy Keiko, our virtual chief information officer today. Jeremy's been with Mainspring for, it seems like forever, Jeremy, what, 15, 20 years?
Yeah, going on 23 actually now, so.
Yeah, the great part about Jeremy is I don't think there's anything that I've ever seen that he's ever not seen when it comes to technology and business. The annoying part about Jeremy is that he reminds everyone that he's a Kansas City Chiefs fan and what 6-time reigning fantasy football champion. So that's
the one that really gets to you.
I like to get that out there right out of the gate. So Jeremy, I'm going to leave the floor to you and let's dive right into multi-factor authentication.
All right, appreciate it, Ray. So thanks for joining us. First and foremost, everybody, appreciate the time to talk with you. Looking forward to a little Q&A at the end here as well, but want to kind of talk through, we'll start off with the lead topic, which is very prevalent in today's security world, being multi-factor authentication. So let's start off with the basics of what is multi-factor authentication for those who aren't aware. Multi-factor authentication is exactly as it sounds. It's providing multiple factors of authentication. So typically you provide something you know, which is like your password, right? And you'd log in with your password, but then you would have an additional level of authentication as well, whether you're using an app on your phone to receive text messages, phone calls. You know, if you have a token that has updating passwords on it, there's multiple forms of multi-factor authentication. But the basis of multi-factor authentication is that unless you're providing more than just your password, somebody is not going to be able to get into your account. So the entire purpose of this is to secure access to the data that drives your business, whether that's email, whether that's financials, whether that's business intelligence, whatever that may be. That's what we're looking to protect through this. So how does it work? Essentially, you know, we apply it to whatever application it is that we're looking to protect. And in doing so, once that is enabled, the goal is to keep the bad guys out, right? So as I said, if somebody in Russia is trying to, you know, log into your email and gain access without that second form of authentication, they're not able to get in. You know, and it really breaks down to that simple. Now, a lot of the challenges in terms of getting people to adopt is a fear over the impact that it's going to have to their users, to their daily lives, right? Normally, you implement a level of security and people are expecting all of these restrictions that are going to paralyze their staff and not allow them to work, right? So, but really, that's not what we're looking at. In most implementations of multi-factor authentication, you're looking at either a daily login that's allowed, or even in some instances, a login where you'll provide authentication to a trusted device vis-a-vis your laptop or your mobile phone. And then that device has a security signature that is then registered within, and they know okay, this is Jeremy that's trying to access his email. I don't have to prompt him every time he opens Outlook or every time he reads an email on his phone. It's just a matter of getting that device registered initially so that that's trusted. However, I go and I'm on vacation and I'm trying to use my wife's tablet to check my email on the beach. I left my phone back, right? If I go to do that, then I'm not going to be able to access it because it's an unknown device. The same way that we're protecting from an attacker, could be in California, could be in Russia, could be wherever, that person is not going to be able to get in because there isn't that second factor of authentication that's being levied in there. We use this every day, right? So this is in our everyday lives. Typically, this is in use with your bank accounts, right? Your social media accounts, your personal email accounts, all of these things. Most people are used to using some form of secondary authentication. You're working with your tax preparer and submitting things back and forth. You've got to log in and get the text code or the email code verification so that you can get into these. This is going to work in a very similar manner in terms of in terms of protecting those. So let's dive in a little bit in terms of how and why people are at risk, right? So data is gold to attackers. The end objective for most is certainly a financial gain, but there's other gains that are out there as well. They may be just looking to harvest email accounts so that they can widen their footprint and get more targeted victims, right, to fall prey for what they're looking to do. So essentially, I can kind of tell a story a little bit about, we focus on email, which is very prevalent in terms of hacked accounts that people are looking at. So what'll happen is that, through very sophisticated phishing schemes, somebody will receive an email for a DocuSign of somebody that they've worked with, right? Because most of the time, these are targeted phishing where they know affiliated businesses, they know affiliated people, and they'll look to spoof an email or something like that, and they'll send a DocuSign. You'll click the link for it, something along those lines. It goes to a very official looking DocuSign page, and it'll say, we need to validate your credentials. Enter your email address and password. You put those things in there, and all of a sudden, they've now got access to your account through your email address and password without that second factor on there. They'll basically sit there quietly where there's no sign of, for a little bit, while there's no sign of any kind of infiltration or compromise. And they'll sit back and they'll watch for conversations. They'll typically target like somebody in accounting or something along those lines. They'll look for a financial discussion. And then while they're doing that, they're scouring and harvesting all the email addresses out of there so that they can find more victims, where they can send messages from you that make it look like it's legitimate, so that they can compromise more accounts. And then in the meantime, they'll come across a financial conversation talking about a wire transfer or a payment that's needed. Then all of a sudden they'll create these email rules and turn them on to basically any messages coming from those people will be redirected to subfolders or some other area of the mailbox so that they can cover their tracks. In the meantime, they're then replying to these messages as you, and looking to redirect a wire transfer somewhere. And next thing you know, you've got a $10,000 payment that you're making that is now being redirected into the attacker's bank account, and they're going to sit back and then collect those funds, right? So this is something that happens on a daily basis that people are coming after. So, multi-factor is key in preventing those types of attacks. So how do we
Jeremy,
reduce
I had a question
those?
for you.
Yeah.
So if it's if multi-factor is not new and it's something that we're using in our day-to-day lives, right? Whether it's confirming a purchase that we made online, or
Yep.
like you said, working with other accounting firms, or completing our taxes and that sort of thing. Why do you think it's met with such resistance, or there are so many concerns about implementing it at a full scale at our workplaces?
So I think the biggest concern and hesitation is just the fear of the unknown. Right? So it's a matter of how is this going to impact the day-to-day activities of my users? You hear all the time that any increase in security means that you're giving up something on the back end, whether it's giving up productivity, giving up something else. So I think that's the biggest paralyzer that exists, when people are kind of making these decisions to implement in terms of getting those things out. That's kind of what we see. The other driver could be cost, depending on the solutions that you're looking to put in place. But I would say that's the biggest driver that we typically see.
What, you mentioned cost, and that kind of leads us down the path of solutions. Can you just share with some of the folks, what are some of the most common multi-factor authentication tools, the free ones or the ones that you got to pay for, and kind of, what's the lay of the land there?
Yeah, so a lot of it depends on what it is that you're trying to protect. So if you're trying to prevent like Office 365, for example, Microsoft has a great built-in tool that can be implemented. It's included in your Office 365 licensing. So there's no additional cost to that. Now, there is certainly a cost to, implement the solution, put the policies in place, assist end users in getting set up and different things along those lines. But overall, the value of the protection that you're going to get is going to outweigh the cost that it's going to be to implement those. Some of the bigger names, if you're looking for things that are going to protect, multiple things within your organization, multiple applications within there, are going to be things like Duo. That's probably the largest name that's out there. ESET, Okta, Authy. There's a number of well-known solutions that are out there that can be put in place for those things. A lot of the times, though, many of the cloud-based software platforms are including multi-factor authentication as an option. Now, they may not be requiring it, and it's something that we may need to dig into to look a little bit closer. But for the most part, a lot of them are teaming up where they're adding a second layer of authentication, and they're either partnering with somebody like Microsoft. You can use Microsoft Authenticator for third-party apps as well to authenticate yourself. You can use the Google platform for multi-factor that ties into some solutions as well. So there's a number of different platforms available to help implement.
You mentioned a lot of solutions, and that's where the discussion went, but you also mentioned that there's other ways to do two-factor authentication, whether that's verifying who you are through a text message and an email. Is there a preferred method, whether it's authenticator apps versus email versus text, that you're driving and recommending to your to your businesses?
Yeah, so look, I mean, text message, SMS isn't 100%. It's certainly better than nothing, right? So at the root of it, if you have a second factor, we've at least taken the biggest step forward, right? So putting anything in there is the best practice. If you're going to dive in deeper than that, I would certainly say using one of the authenticator apps that come with this, whether it's a Duo app, whether it's the Microsoft Authenticator, something along those lines where it's on your phone is going to be a higher level of security, because SMS is still susceptible to hacking as well. There are some security risks to that, but going back to a previous question where you're talking about hesitation, we have gotten some pushback from employees saying, I don't want to put this authenticator app on my phone or something along those lines. This is my personal device. In reality, the authenticators aren't reading anything off of your phone. They don't have any control over your phone or anything like that. It's a small footprint that just resides on your phone that allows Microsoft to send a notification to it. It's not really sending anything out. It's not doing anything other than providing that layer of authentication.
Yeah, I in rare scenarios, I think I can say, the commercial world usually seems to be well ahead of, on-site government world with regard to software applications and just more modern things. The government obviously takes a conservative approach to, vetting applications and solutions before fully adopting it, which I fully endorse. But I remember 20 years ago, sitting on, government site with a fob, with a device that was attached to my keys, that the numbers would change, and a card, right? Eventually it evolved to a card where I'd have to insert it into the slot of my computer. Isn't is it fair to say that fobs are basically the authenticator apps are the digital version of those fobs?
It's the exact same thing. It's an application that's doing the same purpose. Now, those fobs still exist. Those are still around. Those are the tools that you can add into that. It certainly creates, an additional cost to the matter if you're going to go that route. But if you have people who are dead set against putting an app on their phone, those are a way to go. But yes, it totally, it's a virtualized version of that token. And anymore, you're not going to find too many people who aren't carrying their phone around. So they have it on them anyway. So it's not something additional that they have to carry around. They've already got it, right? So
right. We had a couple questions come in. If you could answer those. One of them was, how many employees does your business need to have to warrant an MFA solution? Is there a minimum?
Yeah, a minimum of one. Like if you're accessing a cloud platform, if you're accessing anything remotely, then again, you're subject to risk at that level, right? So, you want to protect your brand, you want to protect your identity, you want to protect your intellectual capital, you want to protect your finances. All of those are still tied, right? So again, we talked about personal apps that are out there, right? I protect my social media with multi-factor. I protect my bank accounts with multi-factor, and that's, my family. But even as an individual, you would want to be protecting those. And the same thing would apply to your business accounts, even if it's a company of one. So
good point. Another attendee asked, do we see a multi-factor authentication replacing single sign-on in the business space as the default security requirement, and how much more secure is MFA?
So single sign-on is a great productivity tool, right? In terms of, managing those accounts. So whether you're using a password manager or whether you're using a single sign-on application, again, I would say they go hand in hand in terms of what you're doing. You want to have both in place if you're going to do those, right? So single sign-on allows you to use a tool like Okta or something along those lines, or tools that'll integrate in. You may see when you log into certain applications, it'll allow you to sign in with your Microsoft account or whatever, that'll have, single sign-on built into it. So single sign-on is a great utility in that regard. But again, if you're using single sign-on with your multi-factor protected Office 365 account, great. Then you've kind of got those things built in hand without having to go to that second layer of implementing multi-factor directly within that other application that you're tying into this, so the single sign-on.
Sure. Well, one thing I'm not sure if I had even realized it, but some of the most effective phishing campaigns or emails that I get are the ones that either mimic Google or Microsoft. And the ones, typically if I'm moving fast, if an email comes in and it says, somebody has logged in to your Google account in, some part of Maryland, if I had an MFA solution in place across all my platforms, I would immediately know that's impossible because I would have had to have authenticated it, which means that app is, that email coming in is just asking me to click the button or download the attachment. So.
Correct. Yeah, and look, even so, you'll know that somebody is trying to attack by getting that alert, right? And do you approve it or deny that request, right? So worst case scenario, another question I get often is if I get a notification, how do I know if it's one of my applications that's trying to re-sign in or something along those lines, right? So what I always say is, look, worst case scenario, you err on the side of caution and don't put it. Your application will try and re-authenticate, if you don't provide that approval of the second authentication, that you get in there. You work with the help desk and work with your IT team to validate if need be. But
okay, we've got one more question, and I know we'll have more at the end. If you can answer this one. One of the attendees mentioned that they're heavily investing in Microsoft, including the Microsoft Cloud, SharePoint.
Yep.
And wants to know, can we use MFA with any authenticator, or does it need to be the Microsoft authenticator? He said that they use Tofu as his authenticator app, for example.
So yeah, it really depends on how your sign-ins are tied in. You can use multiple authenticators with multiple platforms. And again, So Duo is a great example, right? Duo is a platform that can secure, it ties into, 200 backend applications, right? That you can get that. If it ties into Active Directory, you can also tie it into Duo, and you can use Duo. Again, as I say, the authenticator that you use is not necessarily as important as the fact that you are using an authenticator. So
Gotcha.
if we get it set up properly and everything's tied into there, then I'm platform agnostic. One of the best things about the Microsoft Authenticator for Office 365 specifically is it prevents one of the roadblocks to entry, right? There's no cost to do it. It's just there. It's already set up within there. So it's an easier entry point for a number of small businesses that are out there. But if you're already using something and it can be tied in, then yeah, there's no reason why you can't streamline and simplify to try and use the same authenticator for multiple solutions.
Okay, great.
So,
all right. Well, thanks for covering the gamut on MFA. I'm sure we'll have some other questions and some time at the end to address those. The next
one more point before we move on.
Sure.
I just want to, in terms of the what not to do, right? So one of the biggest things I want to point out there is the whole idea of then manual enforcement. We see this all the time when we're coming into new businesses and everything, where there's manual enforcement of MFA. And that's one of the things that we want to try and drive to policy, make it a requirement of the application of the solution that MFA is enabled. And then that way, we're making sure that there's an enforcement. There is no overrides. We don't make exceptions, even if it's the CEO who's saying, if anybody should be protected even more, it should be the CEO, the CFO, right? All of those things. So again, it should be policy against the organization, not necessarily a manual implementation.
And when you say policy, you mean electronic policy, right? You're not just a standard that you want to.
Not a written policy, an enforced policy that has that as a requirement. Gotcha. Correct.
Okay. Thanks. All right, we're going to move on to the next section of today's webinar. One of the goals of this is to share real life experiences. And Jeremy, you've seen a number of organizations in a variety of industries, and the topic, when we talked about what do we want to cover in our first webinar, the topic of, selecting the right vendor when it comes to, really anything that touches your technology. And we wanted to follow this story timeline and give you the floor. And then if anybody has questions or has some clarification, we'll, use the remaining time of the webinar to address them.
Great, thanks, Ray. Yeah. So, and look, this can apply to vendors. This can apply to software solutions. This can apply, across the board to a number of different pieces. So, I want to talk a little bit about the challenges and everything, and then I'll kind of get into some examples of it as well. One of the biggest challenges that we typically see when somebody's doing either a vendor or a solution selection relates down to a couple of key points. Typically, these decisions are made in a vacuum, right? Meaning that it's following a vague board of directors directive, or there's a narrow focus, or there's no clear defined return on investment that's coming back to meet the challenge, right? So these are just a vague set of criteria that are out there that people have gathered up, and it's got a patchwork system of objectives. Typically, it's not data driven. They're just very loose, right? Something that people have come back from a conference and they've heard these buzzwords and they've heard the hodgepodge of acronyms and alphabet soup that's out there of the things that they should be doing to protect themselves and everything that goes along with that. So, so what do? They move on as we go through the journey. They put together an RFP with specific ingredients, right? They're putting an RFP together with solutions already part of the RFP. A solution should not be in your RFP. The objectives are what should be in your RFP. So you need to identify your objectives, not the solutions that you're putting out to bid. I hate RFPs in general, just because they typically don't meet what people are looking to gain in the end. So we find all the time there's unclear selection criteria, right? They don't know what they don't know. So how are they even going to choose a vendor in that area, right? People are going to come back writing to something that they're not really even qualified to assess, quite frankly. But there's no clear budget directives, there's no clear direction, there's no written solution. There's no metrics that are applied to any of the things that are typically what we see typically into these pieces. So, what do? They gather multiple presentations and RFPs, and the decision makers are basically left to be wowed by buzzwords and or scare tactics, right? Depending on the area that you're looking in. And it basically, the decisions are then driven by bad data, whether they're choosing solely on price, whether it's an impressive slide deck, whether it's based on references that are coming from the company, and I can tell you, nobody's going to put an iffy, referral out there, right? They're going to go out, they're going to gather their best people who are going to say the best things, and that's who they're going to put in front of you. Nobody's going to throw a dart and just pick somebody randomly out of their pool of clients that they're going to, have speak on their behalf. So, these different things are going to come back and have challenges associated with it. So before we move on to the solution and impact, right? So we've had a number of experiences with this in the past, right? I can give a specific example, in terms of an RFP that was out. This was many years ago, but that I was a part of. But essentially, RFPs are generally put together with two different pieces, two different approaches. Either it's piecemeal, where they're looking for specific objectives, right? So security-wise, I want to implement single sign-on, or I want to implement multi-factor authentication. I want to have encryption. I want to have, and you basically got a piecemeal list of solutions that are out there. Or they're put together completely vague, wide open, that could be interpreted, 10 different ways in terms of what's going out there, right? So, companies that do a security assessment 10 different ways, right? So some of them are going to come back looking at specific buzzwords that are in there and build towards that. Others are going to come back and say, well, if you're talking about a security assessment, then we've got to do a security assessment that uses the RMF framework or something along those lines, where you're building out, in a GDPR scan, assessment and everything that goes out. And you could be comparing something that's going to be coming back at 100 hours or something that's going to be coming back at 800 hours. And that's quite a big difference in terms of what you're seeing out there. So again, in reality, the requests that are coming back through an RFP are generally unreliable based on the criteria that's put into there. So what's the solution to that? Essentially, we need to determine objectives with clear purpose, right? So we need to identify the drivers of why you're even looking for that solution. We need to identify impacts in regards to the solution that you're looking for. We need to identify who the stakeholders are that this is going to impact within your organization. And we need to identify what the needed and expected results are that's going to come out of this. We do that through auditing and alignment within the project, right? So stakeholder interviews, who are the people who are using this solution? Who are the people that are going to see the results on the outside of this? We need to talk through those. Metrics gathering, right? We need to find what is going to show and demonstrate the results of this project or solution that we're implementing in the first place. And then have a prioritized alignment, right? So what is going to be the biggest impact to the organization? Set those priorities as key and make sure that we're working backwards from there, looking to identify and make sure that we have the best solution possible. Yeah, and the impact of taking that approach is going to be, cost savings. You're going to have a focused investment set to meet specific objectives and guidelines. You're going to have better solution adoption. If your stakeholders are involved in the process, they're going to be more involved in the rollout and in the adoption of that new platform. and you're going to get a return on investment, whether that's a reduction of cost of implementation, whether that's savings of soft cost against, you know, your staff with process improvements and productivity enhancement, you know, to kind of move forward with everything there. So to kind of go back into the challenge I was talking about, you know, with this, we had a client who had put out for a security assessment. They put out an RFP. They listed a number of different criteria that they wanted to have, but they also mentioned that they wanted a full security assessment, GDPR, and everything else in between. So basically what you end up seeing is we've got solutions on the very low end and we've got solutions on the very high end, and a mix of everything in between, because again, there's no clear directive as to what they're looking to go. So in reality, what they were looking for was a review of security best practice, getting security policies written and implemented, and making sure that their business is heading in the right direction. And that's really the basis of what they're looking for. The way the RFP is written, it looks like they're looking for a full RMF framework assessment, you know, 600-hour project of going through and identifying every workflow and everything that goes on within the business. And that's not in reality what they were looking for. And then so what they end up getting is they ended up getting a process that was done through an individual that was bringing in multiple solutions to identify and address a number of those specific requirements that they listed, and not a whole lot more than that, to the point where they spent more money than they should have. They ended up going into a number of different security tangents that they didn't need to go down. And you know, overall, there wasn't a return on the investment that they put toward this project. And again, we see this whether it be with licensing, we see this whether it's, you know, licensing for the wrong products, licensing for the wrong levels, licensing for the wrong security. We see it with vendors for security. We see it with vendors for you know, you name it, whatever the platform
the wrong
is.
solution. Yeah.
Yeah.
Altogether. Yeah, and then having to walk that back after a year or two of you know, nurturing it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it sounds like in that scenario there was a bit of a patchwork. You mentioned patchwork objectives that kind of leads to patchwork, you know, implementation. And
Absolutely.
then, you know, that doesn't lead to you know, full on adoption and an ROI. So how do you circumvent that if you're an organization and you've got a lot of, you know, decisions being made in a vacuum? That's not unique to any industry or any size business, really. I mean, you know, myself included, right? I've been part of organizations, particularly in, you know, sales and marketing, where they have a solution, they want to deploy it, it's exciting, and they want to go out and buy it, and they want to go out and implement it, and they don't want to be slowed down by this process of, you know, putting together, you know, a 15-page RFP, distributing it on the street, waiting for responses, then getting, you know, sales presentations in order. Where's the happy medium in there?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's tough, right? So it's not an easy solution to kind of address. But again, you know, I think it all starts with, before anything is even decided in terms of whether there's an RFP or whether there's a whatever solution. Again, it comes back to those objectives. You have to have the clear objectives of what you want to do. In our case, typically, what you know, we're doing this right out of the gate with our clients by doing assessments against best practices, right? So you need to have your business at a certain level and aligned in a certain place before you know, you can go too far in one direction when you're talking, at least when you're talking about security, right? So, you know, I'll always say, you know, people want to jump right to the end in terms of a security assessment and where they want to go with these security solutions. You don't even have a password policy implemented, right? You don't even have, you know, basics in terms of what your staff can and can't do. So again, you know, you kind of work to build against those best practices and lead up to that, you know, and then you can kind of jump into the next level. But you know, having a baseline to work against, build up to that baseline, and then from there we can start building the enhancements above and beyond, right? So, typically we'll come in is we'll look to build to a certain level of best practice, and then we want to start doing deep dives within the organization. We want to start talking to stakeholders in other departments. Typically when we're meeting with a CEO, we have a certain view of the organization. We get a different view when we meet at a department level, right? So you meet with department heads, you do stakeholder interviews, and you find out, where those pieces are going to come from.
What role should be part of that conversation? I mean, we're talking about, when vendor selection's decentralized, right? When department heads are giving responsibility for, raising their hand when they see other solutions or ways of doing things, whether it's to generate more revenue, be more efficient,
Yep.
Or improve security. So when vendor selection is decentralized, this is the question that came in: who should take the lead on ensuring clear objectives across the company? What role in that organization typically takes that role?
Well, I think when you're talking about small business, that's hard to say in terms of who specifically is going to take that role, and I think it differs from business to business. There definitely needs to be a primary point of contact that's going to be that stakeholder, because what often we find as well, this is a great question, because it leads to the fact that oftentimes solutions are built in silos, right? And especially with a larger small business, you may have different departments that are each going after the same objective, and they're building and developing within a silo without even bringing it to the company as a whole, right? So you may have a quarter of your company doing one solution, working with this third party vendor and doing this, and you've got another one that's doing something very similar on the other side, where there could be cost savings and performance enhancements by bridging those things and seeing what you can get, having both people work within the same platform, rather than having multiple solutions built out,
Duplicate
in
costs,
these silos.
application sprawls, over provisioning and over purchasing of licensing. A lot of waste that I'm sure, a lot of CEOs and COOs are interested in avoiding. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's save a couple minutes here for a few questions. Anything else that might pop in? But I think you've run kind of the full gamut on a topic that I don't know if anyone's perfected, and they can probably empathize with the story as far as identifying a solution, wanting to be swift and move fast enough to help the organization. But when it's just not always an easy fix, but I think just identifying the challenges, the story you shared, and why, what's the model by which organizations follow to even identifying what they need, and then starting the process and how they go about vetting those solutions. Doesn't look like I have any other additional questions that are flowing in. Jeremy, if you have any other thoughts or comments, we can even go back to MFA. I'll open it up to the attendees if anything that was not answered during the multi-factor authentication part of today's webinar. Happy to answer those questions as well. Jeremy, do you have anything else you would like to add?
No, I mean, again, I think just talking about our approach and where we go, and again, I think the biggest thing is to those stakeholder interviews, I think, are the biggest key that I'd like to leave an emphasis on that, in terms of bringing centralized decisions within your organization, and kind of moving things forward with that. Again, clear directives, clear goals, and what I tell my clients typically is let us help you with that. So, again, especially if there's areas that you're not familiar with, even if it's areas that we're not familiar with, I've got other clients who are doing similar things as well, and we can help, bring those people together as well. So, and I'm happy to work with anybody in terms of doing those types of things.
Great. Well, that leads us to resources for everybody who attended today. Wanted to say thank you, Jeremy, for taking the time today to dive into some topics that I know you work with day in and day out, that are still very relevant in today's businesses and associations. We've got a website, just like everybody else, gomainspring.com, where you can find some additional resources and articles to help you stay secure and improve your productivity. I've got my contact information up on the page. Happy to connect you with Jeremy as well if you would like to have some follow-on questions and comments. This is a recording, so we are going to be sending this to everybody who attended or anybody who registered to attend. So you can play back at your convenience. And this is a monthly vCIO Perspectives webinar. So we do plan to have one in July, dates to be determined. But follow us on LinkedIn, and you'll certainly get an invite, everybody who attended today, to attend the next session, where we'll have another one of our CIOs attend and discuss another hot topic. If you have any specific topics that you would like us to consider for future vCIO Perspectives webinars, we're accepting those as well. So you've got my contact information, please send them in. And thanks again, Jeremy, for your time, and thanks for everybody for taking time out of their day to hear our perspective, and hope you found it valuable, and stay productive and secure.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.